The classroom door swung open at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning, and 23 children tumbled inside with their backpacks and lunchboxes, their voices rising in that particular pitch that only kindergarteners could achieve. Mrs. Patricia Whitmore stood near her desk, greeting each student by name as they entered, watching their faces light up when she remembered small details from the day before. She had been teaching for 17 years, and this ritual never got old. The children hung their coats on hooks, placed their belongings in cubbies, and began gravitating toward the reading corner where picture books waited in colorful bins. Among the crowd was a small girl with dark braids tied with yellow ribbons, moving more slowly than the others. Her name was Emma, and she carried herself with a quietness that Mrs. Whitmore had noticed from the first week of school. While other children rushed and bumped into each other, Emma moved deliberately, almost carefully, as though navigating invisible obstacles. She placed her backpack in her cubby with precision, making sure it hung straight on the hook. Her lunchbox went on the designated shelf, everything in order, everything controlled. "Good morning, Emma," Mrs. Whitmore said warmly, crouching down to the child's eye level. Emma offered a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Ready for another fun day?" The girl nodded, clutching the straps of her jumper dress with both hands. Then she walked toward her assigned desk in the second row and stood beside it, watching the other children settle into their chairs around the room. Mrs. Whitmore noticed, but didn't think much of it initially. Sometimes children needed a moment to transition from home to school. She moved to the front of the classroom and began taking attendance. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. "Please take your seats, everyone," Mrs. Whitmore called out in her practiced teacher voice, friendly but firm. The children responded immediately, scrambling into chairs, some still chattering about cartoons they'd watched that morning or toys they'd brought for show and tell later. The room settled into a manageable hum of activity as pencils were retrieved and notebooks opened. Emma remained standing beside her desk, her hands now at her sides, her expression neutral. Mrs. Whitmore glanced at her, then back at her attendance sheet. Perhaps the child was distracted or daydreaming. "Emma, sweetheart, we're starting our morning work. Please sit down." Emma's eyes widened slightly. She looked at her chair, then back at her teacher. "I'm okay, Mrs. Whitmore." "I know you're okay, honey, but we all need to sit for our writing practice." "I can stand." Several nearby children turned to look. Mrs. Whitmore felt a small flicker of concern, but pushed it aside. 5-year-olds tested boundaries sometimes. It was part of development. "Emma, everyone sits during lessons. That's our classroom rule." The girl's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Please, I can see better standing." Mrs. Whitmore walked over, her shoes clicking softly against the linoleum floor. She kept her voice gentle. "Are you feeling okay? Does your tummy hurt?" "No, ma'am." "Then I need you to sit down like your friends." Emma looked at the orange plastic chair as if it were something dangerous. After a long pause, she slowly lowered herself onto it, but the moment her weight settled, her entire body tensed. Her jaw clenched. Her hands gripped the edge of the desk so tightly her knuckles turned pale. She sucked in a sharp breath through her teeth. Mrs. Whitmore saw it all. "Emma, what's wrong?" "Nothing," the girl whispered, forcing that same small smile from earlier. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Mrs. Whitmore could see it in every rigid line of the child's small frame. Emma sat, perched on the very edge of the chair, distributing as little weight as possible. Her back ramrod straight, her breathing shallow. After only 30 seconds, she shifted forward even more, then glanced up at her teacher with pleading eyes. May I stand now? Mrs. Whitmore hesitated. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't identify what. Let's try sitting just a little longer, okay? We'll do our letters and then you can stand during story time if you need to. Emma's eyes filled with tears that she blinked away rapidly. She nodded and remained in the chair, but every moment was clearly agony. She held her pencil but barely moved it across the paper. While other children traced letters and drew pictures, Emma sat frozen, occasionally shifting her weight with tiny pained adjustments that she tried to hide. After 5 minutes, Mrs. Whitmore couldn't ignore it anymore. "All right, Emma. You can stand." The girl practically launched herself upright, relief flooding her features. She stood beside her desk and finally began working on her paper, her hand moving freely now, her shoulders dropping from their hunched position. Mrs. Whitmore watched her for another moment, then continued circulating through the classroom, helping other students. But her mind kept returning to that strange reaction. During the next transition, when the children moved to the carpet for calendar time, Emma hung back. The other kids plopped down cross-legged in a semicircle, jostling for spots near the front. Emma stood at the edge of the group. "Emma, find a spot on the carpet, please," Mrs. Whitmore said from her reading chair. "Can I stand in the back? I don't want to block anyone." "You won't block anyone, sweetie. Sit with your friends." The girl's face fell. She looked at the carpeted floor as if it were made of hot coals, then lowered herself down with the same painful deliberateness as before. This time she didn't sit cross-legged like the others. She knelt instead, keeping her weight on her knees, her hands pressed against her thighs. Within moments, she was shifting, adjusting, trying to find any position that didn't cause whatever discomfort she was experiencing. Mrs. Whitmore led the calendar lesson, pointing to dates and weather symbols, asking children to identify numbers and patterns. Emma participated when called on, answering correctly in her quiet voice, but she never stopped moving. Small shifts, subtle weight changes, pressing one hand against the floor to take pressure off her lower body. When story time came, Mrs. Whitmore invited the children to relax and get comfortable while she read. Most sprawled out or leaned against friends. Emma stood up immediately and positioned herself behind the group. Mrs. Whitmore decided not to push it. Perhaps the child was going through a phase. Perhaps she'd had a nightmare about chairs. Children developed odd fears sometimes. But as the week progressed, the behavior didn't stop. If anything, it became more pronounced. Emma avoided sitting at every opportunity. During lunch in the cafeteria, she stood beside the table while eating, claiming she wasn't hungry enough to stay long, even though she barely touched her food. During art class, she stood at her easel the entire time, which seemed normal enough since many children did that. But during the cleanup, when everyone sat in a circle to discuss their paintings, Emma remained standing until directly instructed otherwise. Then the same pattern repeated. The cautious lowering, the rigid posture, the barely concealed wincing. Other teachers began to notice. The PE instructor mentioned that Emma refused to sit during the cool-down stretches. The librarian commented that Emma always stood in the back during story hour, never settling into the beanbags like the other children. The pattern was consistent and it was spreading across every environment in the school. Mrs. Whitmore decided to observe more carefully. She noted that Emma never sat during recess either, which was perhaps the most telling detail. Children were supposed to rest on the benches after running around, but Emma would stand beside the bench, leaning against it at most, even when she was clearly exhausted. When Mrs. Whitmore suggested she sit and rest her legs, Emma shook her head. "My legs are fine, Mrs. Whitmore." "But you've been running for 20 minutes. Don't you want to sit down?" "I like standing." "Everyone needs to rest sometimes, sweetheart." Emma's expression became guarded. "I'm resting. Standing is resting for me." The logic made no sense, but the child's tone suggested this was not a conversation she wanted to continue. Mrs. Whitmore let it go but made a mental note to bring it up with the school counselor. That afternoon, during quiet reading time, Mrs. Whitmore walked around the classroom while students looked at books independently. Most were sprawled on the carpet or lounging in their chairs. Emma was standing at her desk again, holding a book but not really reading it. Her eyes stared at the pages without moving, and her face had taken on a grayish tinge that worried Mrs. Whitmore deeply. She approached quietly. "Emma, can I talk to you for a minute?" The girl looked up, startled. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, honey, I just want to check on you." Emma's shoulders tensed. "I'm okay." Mrs. Whitmore knelt down beside the desk, keeping her voice low so other children wouldn't hear. "I've noticed you don't like to sit down. Is something bothering you? Does your bottom hurt?" The direct question made Emma's eyes go wide with something that looked like fear. She clutched her book tighter. "No. Are you sure? You can tell me if something's wrong. I'm here to help." "Nothing's wrong," Emma insisted, but her voice cracked slightly. I just like standing better. That's all. But standing all day must make you tired." "I'm not tired." Mrs. Whitmore studied the child's face. Emma was clearly exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her skin looked pale. She swayed slightly as she stood there, as if staying upright required tremendous effort. Yet she remained adamant, almost desperate, in her refusal to admit anything was wrong. "Okay," Mrs. Whitmore said gently, not wanting to push too hard and shut down communication entirely. "But if you ever want to talk about anything, I'm always here. You know that, right?" Emma nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Whitmore returned to her desk, but couldn't focus on grading papers. Something was very wrong. This wasn't normal childhood behavior. This wasn't a phase or a quirk or a fear of chairs. This was a child in distress, trying desperately to hide it, and doing so with a skill level that suggested she'd had practice concealing pain. The following Monday brought a parent-teacher conference that Mrs. Whitmore had specifically requested with Emma's mother. She'd sent home a note on Friday afternoon explaining that she'd like to discuss Emma's adjustment to kindergarten, keeping the language positive and non-alarming. When Mrs. Thompson arrived at 3:30, she seemed rushed and slightly irritated at having to take time away from work. "I don't have long," she said, settling into the adult-sized chair across from Mrs. Whitmore's desk without preamble. "What's this about? Emma's grades are fine, aren't they?" "Emma's academic performance is excellent," Mrs. Whitmore assured her, pulling out a folder of the girl's work. "She's reading above grade level, and her math skills are strong. This is about something else I've observed." Mrs. Thompson's expression tightened. "What kind of something else?" "Emma doesn't sit down. Not during class, not during lunch, not during any part of the school day if she can avoid it. When I insist that she sit, she becomes very uncomfortable. It seems to cause her pain." Mrs. Thompson's face flushed. "She's always been dramatic. She doesn't like sitting still. Some kids are like that." "This is different," Mrs. Whitmore said carefully. "It's not about fidgeting or having excess energy. She actually appears to be in physical discomfort when she sits. I'm concerned there might be a medical issue that needs attention." "There's no medical issue," Mrs. Thompson snapped. "She's fine at home." "Does she sit normally at home?" A pause, barely perceptible. "Of course." Mrs. Whitmore sensed she was lying but couldn't prove it. "I really think it would be wise to have her examined by her pediatrician just to rule out anything serious. Sometimes children develop conditions that—" "I know my own daughter, Mrs. Whitmore. She's fine. She's just being difficult because she wants attention. If she's disrupting your class, discipline her. That's what teachers are supposed to do, isn't it?" The hostility in Mrs. Thompson's voice startled Mrs. Whitmore. "I'm not looking to discipline her. I'm worried about her well-being." "Well, don't be." She's fine. Are we done here? Mrs. Whitmore wanted to say more, wanted to push harder, but the wall Mrs. Thompson had thrown up was impenetrable. I suppose so. But please know I'm here if you ever need support or resources. Mrs. Thompson stood abruptly. I don't need resources. I need teachers who focus on teaching instead of making problems where there aren't any. She grabbed her purse and walked out, leaving Mrs. Whitmore sitting alone in the empty classroom, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. That night, Mrs. Whitmore couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the conversation, analyzing Mrs. Thompson's defensive reaction, wondering what she was missing. Years of teaching had given her instincts about these things, and every instinct screamed that Emma was suffering. But without concrete evidence or parental cooperation, her hands were tied. She couldn't call Child Protective Services based on a child's refusal to sit. It sounded absurd even thinking about it. Yet the feeling wouldn't leave her alone. The next day, she decided to try a different approach. During morning circle time, she pulled Emma aside while the other children were busy with a puzzle activity. Emma, can we talk for just a minute? The girl nodded, though wariness clouded her features. Mrs. Whitmore led her to a quiet corner of the classroom. I met with your mom yesterday. Emma's whole body went rigid. What did you tell her? Just that I've noticed you prefer standing, that's all. Did you say anything else? Like what, honey? Emma looked down at her shoes. I don't know. Nothing. Mrs. Whitmore crouched down to Emma's level again, making sure their eyes could meet. Emma, I want you to know something very important. If something is hurting you, or if something happened that made you not want to sit down, you can tell me. You won't get in trouble. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Promise. I promise, cross my heart. Emma's lower lip trembled. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. The internal struggle was visible on her small face, the war between wanting help and being afraid of consequences. Finally, she whispered, I can't. Why not, sweetheart? Because it'll make things worse. It always makes things worse when people ask questions. The words hit Mrs. Whitmore like a physical blow. Who told you that? Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Nobody. I just know. Emma, listen to me very carefully. Sometimes things feel scary, but telling a trusted adult is always the right choice. Whatever is happening, we can help make it better. But Emma was already shaking her head, backing away slightly. I'm okay, really. I just don't like sitting. That's all. Can I go back to the puzzles now? Mrs. Whitmore wanted to push further but recognized the signs of a child shutting down completely. If she pressed too hard now, Emma might never open up. Okay, but remember what I said. I'm always here. Emma nodded and hurried back to the group, but for the rest of the morning, she wouldn't make eye contact with her teacher. The situation came to a head on Thursday afternoon. The class was working on an art project that required sitting at desks with multiple supplies scattered across tables. Mrs. Whitmore had been clear that everyone needed to sit for safety reasons since they were using scissors and glue. Emma had reluctantly complied. But within 5 minutes her face had gone white, sweat beaded on her forehead. She gripped her scissors with shaking hands. Emma, are you all right? Mrs. Whitmore asked, walking over. I'm fine, the girl gasped, but she clearly wasn't. You look like you're going to be sick. I just need to stand up, please, just for a minute. Mrs. Whitmore made a quick decision. All right, everyone else keep working. Emma, come with me. She led the girl out into the hallway, away from curious eyes and listening ears. The moment they cleared the doorway, Emma straightened up, relief washing over her face as she stood freely in the empty corridor. But she was trembling, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Talk to me, Mrs. Whitmore said softly. Please, I can see you're in pain. I'm not supposed to tell, Emma sobbed. I'll get in so much trouble. You won't get in trouble with me, I promise you that. Whatever this is, we need to help you. Does sitting hurt? Emma nodded, the tears coming harder now. Where does it hurt? The girl couldn't say the words. Instead, she gestured vaguely toward her backside, her face flushing with shame and fear. Mrs. Whitmore's heart began to pound. Has it been hurting for a long time? Another nod. Did something happen? Did you fall or hurt yourself? Emma shook her head miserably. It just hurts. It hurts all the time, even at night. Especially at night. Have you told your parents? Fresh panic flashed across Emma's face. No, you can't tell them. Please don't tell them. They'll be so mad. Why would they be mad, sweetheart? Because I'm supposed to be quiet about it. I'm not supposed to complain. It makes everything harder when I complain. Mrs. Whitmore felt cold dread settling into her bones. The pieces were coming together in a picture she desperately didn't want to see. Emma, has anyone hurt you? The girl's eyes went wide. I can't answer that. Why not? Because I promised. I promised I wouldn't tell. Who did you promise? Emma's face crumpled. I want to go back to class now. Please, I won't complain anymore. I'll sit whenever you want. Just please don't ask me more questions. Mrs. Whitmore knelt down and gently placed her hands on Emma's shoulders. Listen to me. Some promises aren't good to keep. Some promises are meant to protect people who are doing bad things. If someone hurt you and made you promise not to tell, that's not a promise you have to keep. But they said. Emma stopped herself, covering her mouth with both hands as if she could physically stop the words from escaping. Who said what, honey? Emma shook her head violently, the tears flowing freely now. I can't tell. Please don't make me tell. Mrs. Whitmore's mind raced. She was treading in dangerous territory now, territory that required protocol and procedures. She couldn't continue this conversation without potentially compromising any future investigation. Okay, she said gently. You don't have to tell me everything right now, but I need to ask you one very important question, and I need you to be brave and answer honestly. Can you do that? Emma hesitated, then nodded. Is someone hurting you at home? The girl's silence was answer enough. Her eyes told the whole story, filled with terror and shame and desperate pleading. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. She just stood there, trembling, trapped in a nightmare that Mrs. Whitmore was only beginning to understand. All right, Mrs. Whitmore said, keeping her voice calm even though her insides were churning. Here's what's going to happen. I need you to go sit with Mrs. Peterson in the office for a little while, okay? She'll give you some juice and crackers and you can read books. You're not in any trouble at all. I just need to make some phone calls. What kind of phone calls? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Calls to people who help keep kids safe. That's their job and they're very good at it. Will I get taken away? The question broke Mrs. Whitmore's heart. I don't know exactly what will happen, sweetheart, but I do know that you deserve to feel safe and not be in pain. And whatever happens next, I'll be here. I won't leave you alone through this. Emma nodded slowly, accepting this with the weary resignation of a child who had already learned that adults made decisions and children simply had to endure them. Mrs. Whitmore walked her to the main office, explained briefly to the secretary that Emma needed to stay there for a while, and then went directly to the principal's office. Principal Martinez looked up from her computer as Mrs. Whitmore entered without knocking. Patricia, what's wrong? I need to make a report to CPS, right now. Within 40 minutes, 2 social workers arrived at the school. Mrs. Whitmore met them in the principal's office, where she recounted everything she'd observed over the past weeks. The pattern of avoidance, the visible pain when sitting, the fear in Emma's eyes, the defensive mother, the conversation in the hallway where Emma had all but confirmed someone was hurting her at home. The social workers listened with practiced expressions that revealed nothing, taking notes in slim folders, asking clarifying questions. "Has the child disclosed specific abuse?" the older social worker asked, a woman named Ms. Chen with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Not in those exact words," Mrs. Whitmore admitted. "But she indicated that sitting causes her severe pain, that it's been ongoing, and that she's afraid of her parents finding out she talked about it. When I asked directly if someone was hurting her at home, she didn't deny it. She just looked terrified." The younger social worker, a man named Derek who couldn't have been more than 25, nodded. "That's enough for us to open an investigation. We'll need to interview the child here before she goes home today." "Of course, she's in the office with our secretary right now." "We'll also need to have her examined by a pediatrician who specializes in these cases. If there are signs of ongoing abuse or neglect, we'll take protective custody today. If the evidence is less clear, we may need to conduct a more thorough investigation before making that determination." Mrs. Whitmore's stomach twisted. "What if you send her home and something happens to her tonight?" Ms. Chen's expression softened slightly. "We don't take these situations lightly, Mrs. Whitmore. If we believe a child is in immediate danger, we act immediately. But we also have to follow legal protocols. We can't remove a child from their home without sufficient cause. Her refusal to sit isn't sufficient. It's a strong indicator, but on its own it could potentially be explained by medical conditions that aren't abuse-related. That's why the medical examination is crucial. We need documentation," Derek added. "But the fact that she's expressed fear of her parents and made statements suggesting someone is hurting her gives us additional grounds to move forward quickly. We'll interview her now, and depending on what she tells us and what the doctor finds, we'll make our decision by this evening." Mrs. Whitmore nodded, feeling helpless despite having done everything by the book. "Can I be with her during the interview?" Ms. Chen shook her head. "It's better if we speak with her alone. Children sometimes say things differently when teachers or other authority figures are present. But you can be nearby if she needs you afterward." The next 2 hours were excruciating. Mrs. Whitmore tried to focus on her remaining students, who had been supervised by the teacher's aide while all this unfolded. But her mind kept drifting to Emma in that office, being asked questions by strangers, reliving whatever trauma she'd been enduring. When the final bell rang and children were dismissed, Mrs. Whitmore stayed behind, unable to leave without knowing the outcome. Principal Martinez appeared in her doorway around 4 o'clock. "The social workers are finished with their interview. They want to speak with you before they leave." Mrs. Whitmore practically ran to the office. Miss Chen and Derek were waiting in the conference room with Principal Martinez. Emma was no longer visible. "Where is she?" Mrs. Whitmore asked immediately. "On her way to Children's Hospital for examination," Miss Chen said. "Based on what she disclosed to us, we have sufficient concern to proceed with protective custody pending medical evaluation." Relief and horror washed through Mrs. Whitmore simultaneously. "What did she tell you?" Derek glanced at Ms. Chen, who nodded slightly before speaking. "I can't share specific details of her disclosure, but I can tell you that Emma described a pattern of punishment at home that involves physical harm. She's been living with pain for several weeks, possibly longer. She's been too afraid to tell anyone because the punishments escalated when she complained. The pain she's experiencing when sitting is real and is consistent with the type of abuse she described." Mrs. Whitmore sank into a chair. "Oh God, that poor baby." "You did the right thing by reporting this," Ms. Chen continued. "Many teachers miss these signs or convince themselves it's not their place to interfere. You saved this child from who knows how much additional suffering. What happens now?" Medical examination first. They'll document any injuries and assess her overall health. If the evidence supports her disclosure, which we expect it will, she'll be placed in emergency foster care tonight. We'll initiate a full investigation of the home, interview the parents, and work with law enforcement if criminal charges are warranted. Can I see her before she goes? Derek shook his head. She's already en route to the hospital, but you can visit her once she's placed in foster care, if she wants to see you and if the foster parents agree. We'll keep the school informed of her status. After the social workers left, Mrs. Whitmore sat in the empty conference room and cried. She cried for Emma, for all the pain she'd endured silently while trying to be a good student, for all the mornings she'd walked into this building carrying a burden no child should carry. She cried for her own naivety in not recognizing the signs sooner, even though logically she knew she'd acted as quickly as possible once the pattern became clear. Principal Martinez brought her tissues and sat beside her. You couldn't have known earlier. But maybe I could have. Maybe if I'd paid closer attention in those first weeks. Patricia, stop. You did everything right. You observed, you documented, you tried working with the parent, and when that failed and the child gave you enough information, you reported immediately. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does, but it's what saves kids. One teacher who cared enough to notice and act. The next morning, Mrs. Whitmore arrived at school early, exhausted from a sleepless night. She'd prepared a letter for her students explaining that Emma wouldn't be in class for a while but would be okay. She kept it vague and positive, not wanting to traumatize the other children or spread information that wasn't hers to share. When the kids asked questions, she simply said that Emma needed to spend time with doctors who were helping her feel better. 3 days later, Miss Chen called with an update. Emma had been examined by specialists who documented evidence of severe physical abuse consistent with her disclosure. She'd been enduring punishment that involved being struck with objects, punishment that had become increasingly frequent and violent over recent months. The pain, when sitting, was from bruising and minor injuries that had been left untreated. The parents claimed it was discipline and that they had every right to punish their child as they saw fit. But the severity and nature of the injuries went far beyond legal discipline. She's safe now, Miss Chen assured her. She's placed with an experienced foster family who has dealt with abuse cases before. She started counseling and medical treatment. Physically, she should heal within a few weeks. Emotionally, will take longer, but she's resilient. Kids are remarkably resilient when given the chance. Can I visit her? I'll check with the foster parents and with Emma. I'll let you know. The approval came 2 days later. Mrs. Whitmore drove to a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, her car filled with books she'd brought for Emma, along with some of the artwork the class had made for her. A woman in her 50s answered the door with a warm smile. You must be Mrs. Whitmore. I'm Sandra. Emma's been asking about you. How is she? Adjusting. It's hard, of course, but she's safe here and starting to understand that. Come in. The house smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, and children's artwork covered the refrigerator. Sandra led her to a small bedroom where Emma sat on the floor, surrounded by stuffed animals. When she saw Mrs. Whitmore, her face lit up in a way it never had at school. Mrs. Whitmore. Hi, sweetheart. Mrs. Whitmore knelt down on the floor beside her. I've missed you. I missed you too. Look, Sandra got me new books. She held up several picture books, clearly treasures to her. Those look wonderful. Your classmates made you some things too. She pulled out the artwork and cards, and Emma examined each one with careful attention, reading the messages her classmates had written in their kindergarten handwriting. They talked for a while about light things, about the class guinea pig, about upcoming field trips Emma would miss, about nothing and everything. Then Emma looked up with those serious eyes that had always seemed too old for her face. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you mad at me?" "Mad at you? Why would I be mad?" "Because I didn't tell you sooner." "About what was happening?" Mrs. Whitmore felt her throat tighten. "Oh, honey, no. I'm not mad at you at all. You were in a scary situation, and you were trying to survive the only way you knew how. That's not something to be mad about. That's something to admire." "Really? Really? You were so brave, Emma. Even when you were hurting, you came to school every day and tried your best. And when you finally felt safe enough to tell someone, you did. That took incredible courage." Emma's eyes welled up. "It hurt so much. All the time. And I thought if I just didn't complain, if I just was really good, it would stop. But it didn't stop. It just kept happening." Mrs. Whitmore pulled the child into a gentle hug, mindful of any injuries that might still be healing. "It's over now. The people who hurt you can't hurt you anymore. You're safe here with Sandra, and there are lots of people making sure you stay safe." "I can sit now," Emma said quietly. "It still hurts a little bit, but the doctor gave me medicine and said I'm getting better. Sandra has special cushions that help. I'm so glad." They spent another hour together before Mrs. Whitmore had to leave. Emma walked her to the door, holding her hand. "Will you come visit me again?" "As often as they'll let me. And who knows, maybe when you're feeling ready, you can come back to school. Would you like that?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "I miss school. I miss learning. School misses you too." Driving home, Mrs. Whitmore thought about how close Emma had come to falling through the cracks. If she'd been less observant, if she'd accepted the mother's dismissive explanations, if she'd convinced herself it wasn't her business or that she was overreacting, Emma would still be suffering right now. The thought made her physically ill. Over the following weeks, the investigation continued. Mrs. Whitmore was interviewed multiple times by both social workers and police detectives. She provided detailed accounts of Emma's behavior, the conversations they'd had, her observations about the mother's reaction during their conference. The school's documentation proved crucial in building the case. Meanwhile, Emma began the slow process of healing. Mrs. Whitmore visited every Saturday, bringing schoolwork so Emma wouldn't fall behind, but mostly just being a consistent, safe presence in the child's life. She watched as Emma gradually relaxed in Sandra's home, as the constant wariness faded from her eyes, as she started to laugh and play like a normal 5-year-old. During one visit, Sandra pulled Mrs. Whitmore aside while Emma was playing in the backyard. "I wanted you to know that she talks about you all the time. You're her hero." Mrs. Whitmore shook her head. "I just did what any teacher should do." "That's not true, and you know it. Many teachers would have convinced themselves it wasn't their problem, or that they were imagining things. You trusted your instincts and acted. That's heroism." "Have you heard anything about the case? About whether she'll be able to stay with you permanently?" Sandra nodded. "The parents' rights are being terminated. There's enough evidence that they won't be able to fight it successfully. Emma will be available for adoption soon. My husband and I are considering it, actually. We've fostered dozens of kids over the years, but Emma has really stolen our hearts. We're not young, but we have a lot of love to give, and she deserves a stable home." Tears sprang to Mrs. Whitmore's eyes. "That would be wonderful. We'll see how it goes. Right now, we're just focused on helping her heal." 6 weeks after the initial report, Emma returned to school. Mrs. Whitmore and Principal Martinez had prepared the class carefully, explaining that Emma had been dealing with some difficult things but was doing much better now. They discussed kindness and not asking intrusive questions. When Emma walked through the classroom door that Monday morning, the entire class erupted in cheers. Mrs. Whitmore watched as Emma's face glowed with genuine happiness. The other children rushed to hug her, to show her what they'd been working on, to include her in their games and activities. And when circle time came, Emma sat down on the carpet with everyone else without hesitation. She sat cross-legged like the other kids, comfortable and pain-free, her attention focused on the calendar lesson. It was such a small thing, sitting on a carpet. But to Mrs. Whitmore, watching Emma participate fully in class activities for the first time, it represented everything. Healing, safety, hope, the restoration of childhood innocence that should never have been stolen in the first place. As the weeks turned into months, Emma thrived. Her grades remained excellent, but more importantly, her spirit emerged. She became more talkative, more playful, more willing to take risks in her learning. She raised her hand to answer questions without fear. She laughed at jokes. She made friends. She became the child she was always meant to be, before pain and fear had forced her into self-protection mode. The school year ended with a small graduation ceremony for the kindergarteners. Parents filled the gymnasium, cameras ready to capture their children, receiving certificates and singing songs. Sandra and her husband sat in the front row, beaming with pride as Emma participated in every activity. Mrs. Whitmore watched from her position with the other teachers, her heart full. After the ceremony, Emma ran up to her with her certificate clutched in both hands. "Look, Mrs. Whitmore, I graduated." "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You worked so hard this year." "Sandra says I can come back to this school next year for first grade. I don't have to change schools." "That's wonderful news." Emma lowered her voice to a whisper. "She also says they're going to adopt me, for real, forever." Mrs. Whitmore crouched down to Emma's level one more time, this time with joy instead of concern. "Emma, that's the best news I've heard all year. You deserve a forever family who loves you." "I know I do," Emma said with the simple confidence of a child who had learned her worth. "And I'm going to have one." As summer vacation began, Mrs. Whitmore found herself reflecting on the year frequently. She thought about all the small moments that had added up to saving a child's life, the attention to detail that had noticed something wrong, the persistence in observing patterns instead of dismissing them, the courage to have difficult conversations and make difficult phone calls, the refusal to accept easy explanations when her instincts screamed otherwise. She thought about Emma standing beside her desk day after day, suffering in silence because she'd been taught that speaking up only made things worse. She thought about how many other children might be in similar situations right now, in classrooms across the country, displaying signs that might or might not be noticed by the adults around them. The experience changed how Mrs. Whitmore taught. She became even more observant, more willing to trust her intuitions, more ready to ask uncomfortable questions when something felt off. She shared Emma's story in professional development sessions with other teachers, always changing identifying details to protect the child's privacy, but using the lessons learned to help others recognize warning signs. A year later, Emma was indeed adopted by Sandra and her husband. The finalization hearing was a joyous occasion. Emma wore a new dress and had flowers in her hair. She stood before the judge with her soon-to-be official parents and answered his questions with confidence. When he struck his gavel and declared the adoption final, Emma threw her arms around Sandra's neck with pure, unrestrained happiness. Mrs. Whitmore attended the hearing as a witness, having been asked by the family to be there for this important moment. Watching Emma receive the permanency and love she deserved brought tears to her eyes. This was what justice looked like. This was what advocacy accomplished. One teacher who noticed. One teacher who cared enough to act. After the hearing, there was a small celebration at Sandra's house. Emma's new extended family came, along with the social workers who had worked her case and a few other people who had been part of her journey. Emma moved through the crowd like a butterfly, showing off her adoption certificate, telling everyone about her new last name, radiating joy from every pore. At one point, she pulled Mrs. Whitmore aside to a quiet corner. "I want to tell you something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I remember that day in the hallway when you asked me what was wrong and I was too scared to tell you. I remember thinking that you were the first person who looked at me and really saw me. Not just a student who was being difficult, but a kid who was hurting and needed help." Mrs. Whitmore felt her eyes fill with tears again. "I'm so glad I noticed, Emma." "Me too, because if you hadn't noticed, I'd still be there, still hurting, still scared all the time. But now I'm here and I have a real family, and I'm happy." She paused, her expression turning serious. "I want to help other kids like me when I grow up. Kids who are hurting but too scared to tell. I want to be someone who notices, like you did. You'll be wonderful at that. You have such a kind heart." Emma hugged her tightly. "Thank you for saving me, Mrs. Whitmore." "You saved yourself, honey. I just opened the door." As Mrs. Whitmore drove home that evening, the sun setting in brilliant oranges and purples across the sky, she thought about Emma's words, about being someone who notices, about looking at children not just as students to be taught, but as whole human beings who might be carrying invisible burdens, about how one person's attention and action could change the entire trajectory of a life. She thought about how many times throughout her teaching career she'd had children in her classroom who were struggling, and she'd never know all their stories or all their pain. But she'd keep watching, she'd keep noticing. She'd keep being willing to ask the hard questions and make the difficult phone calls, because that was what it meant to truly teach children. Not just academics, but humanity. Not just knowledge, but safety. Not just lessons, but love. Emma's story would stay with her forever, a reminder of why this work mattered. A reminder that sometimes the most important thing a teacher does has nothing to do with reading or math or science. Sometimes the most important thing is simply seeing a child, really seeing them, and refusing to look away when something doesn't feel right. The next school year brought a new class of kindergarteners, each with their own stories and struggles and triumphs waiting to unfold. Mrs. Whitmore greeted them at the door with the same warmth she'd shown for 17 years, but with new awareness. She watched how they moved, how they interacted, how they responded to sitting and standing, and all the small physical demands of school life. She paid attention to the subtle signs of discomfort or fear or pain that children tried so hard to hide. And she remembered Emma standing beside her desk day after day with quiet courage, waiting for someone to notice. She remembered and she watched, and she was ready to notice again if needed. Because that's what teachers do. They notice, they care, they act, and sometimes they change everything. If you found Emma's story meaningful, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about resilience, courage, and the power of paying attention. Share this with someone who works with children or anyone who might need a reminder about the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. Your engagement helps these important stories reach more people. Drop a comment below about a time when you, or someone you know, noticed something important that others missed. We read every comment and your stories matter. Because in the end, Emma's story isn't just about one teacher and one student. It's about all of us. About creating a world where children feel safe enough to speak up and where adults care enough to listen. It's about understanding that sometimes the smallest signs point to the biggest problems, and that our willingness to notice and act can literally save lives. One teacher noticed a child who wouldn't sit down. One teacher asked questions when it would have been easier to look away. One teacher made a phone call that changed everything, and because of that, A little girl who once stood beside her desk in silent agony now sits comfortably in a loving home, dreaming of a future where she'll help other children just like someone once helped her. That's the power of noticing. That's the power of caring. That's the power of one person who decides that every child matters enough to pay attention, to ask questions, to act when necessary. In a world that often moves too fast and looks away too easily, be the person who notices. Be the person who cares enough to act. Be the person who changes everything. One teacher saw a child standing when she should have been sitting, and that made all the difference.